How many times have you seen this portrait? It's safe to say enough to lose count. It is the most famous piece of art in the world. And even if you've never visited the Louvre, you've likely encountered this lady hundreds and hundreds of times. The Mona Lisa is everywhere. Her enigma has been pondered for over 500 years. It seems that Mona Lisa has long detached from her portrait and lives a separate literary life. In the 20th century, she also entered mass culture. The painting, presumably created in 1503, has been quoted and interpreted countless times over the centuries, posing new questions. But let's turn to the interpretations later. And now let's look at this portrait with fresh eyes, as if seeing it for the first time. Discard all your preconceptions and just look. Frequent appearances of something dull our perception. To truly see it, conscious effort is required. Every year, 8 million people visit the Louvre just to see the Mona Lisa. Crowds of tourists line up, but they look at her for no more than a minute, often leaving unimpressed. There is no drama in the portrait. It is a contemplative, deeply psychological, quiet portrait that we are still trying to unravel centuries later. To experience a personal encounter with this work of art takes time. This applies to any meeting, but in the case of the Mona Lisa, it's especially important to give yourself that opportunity. A fleeting glance will not allow for an emotional connection with her. What do we see when we look at the portrait? The Mona Lisa sits in a chair in a room and looks at us. She appears satisfied and confident, traits more commonly associated with portraits of aristocratic men than women. In paintings of that time, women usually did not look so boldly and openly at the viewer. It was quite provocative then. Women posing for portraits always appeared detached, always looking away, but the Mona Lisa's gaze is directed at us. This is also the first Italian portrait where the focus is on the model in a three-quarter pose rather than full length. Leonardo's decision makes the painting more intimate and minimizes distracting details. Today, this angle seems ordinary, but at the time it was a revolutionary step. Before this, figures in portraits appeared upright, composed, and aristocratic, but the Mona Lisa is relaxed. Her hands rest gently on the armrest, her body is turned, and her head faces us. There's a sense of life in the pose, without the rigid fixation typical of earlier portraits. Leonardo created the portrait in such a way that nothing distracts our attention from the Mona Lisa's face. He used a classical pyramidal composition, which became popular during the Renaissance. This was a significant departure from 15th century paintings. Such structure gives the painting balance, but most importantly, it creates a clear focus and directs the viewer's gaze. In the case of the Mona Lisa, the composition draws our attention to her face. She wears no distracting outfits or jewelry. Yet posing for one of the most famous and sought-after artists of her time was an opportunity to express her individuality. However, the Mona Lisa's clothing doesn't attract much attention. It conveys no information about her status. Instead of the bright and expensive attire typical of aristocratic portraits, her clothing is surprisingly simple, focusing our attention solely on her face. A silk dress with delicate gold trimming along the neckline, her free-flowing curls framed by a thin, transparent veil. Observe how exquisitely this mourning veil is painted, yet at the same time, it is barely noticeable and weightless. Leonardo developed a technique known as sfumato. In Italian, sfumato means smoky, and it involves blending tones to eliminate sharp contours. This painting, as contemporaries noted, is full of air. Leonardo's use of wet sfumato, an atmospheric effect that scatters light through the air, softens shadows and smooths color contrasts and lines between the viewer and the depicted object. This technique pushed realism in painting to new heights. The face in Leonardo's painting gains an astonishing expression, with subtly defined shadows around the eyes and cheeks that make the forms appear round, sensual, very gentle, and alive. Leonardo also applied this technique to create an atmospheric haze that softens the outlines of distant mountains behind the Mona Lisa. The entire painting differs from the typical depictions of women in Italian art of the time. Portraits usually featured open skies, a plain background, or a simple room. However, the Mona Lisa is set against a complex landscape inspired by real places, but born from Leonardo's imagination. In works of that period, both the figure and the background were usually sharply defined. Yet the background of the Mona Lisa appears blurred and loses clarity as it recedes from the figure. Behind her right shoulder, a road winds towards a body of water. It begins somewhere behind her and ends somewhere in the distance. We know neither the beginning nor the end. It is not just a road, it is a path. It is not a paved road. This is typical of Italian landscapes. A road is a path, and the path is endless. Behind her left shoulder, a bridge spans a narrow waterway, which seems to flow into a larger body of water. The road and bridge are the only signs of human presence. The curves of her hair and clothing reflect the rolling valleys and rivers in the background, linking humans and nature, a favorite theme of Leonardo. The land appears twisted, much like her torso. Notice the river on the right. It seamlessly transitions into the scarf on her left shoulder. We see her connection to the earth. We see in the Mona Lisa a formula of duality, her belonging to two worlds. Not earth and sky, but the earthly world and the universe. We see the mystery carried within a person. One might say the Mona Lisa represents all myths about the universal human. Through the landscape, Leonardo managed to create not just a portrait of a specific person, but a universal image. In this enigmatic painting, he presented something greater than the image of the little-known Florentine Lisa, the third wife of Francesco del Giocondo. The external appearance and inner world of the personality are conveyed with incredible synthesis. This impersonal psychology corresponds to the cosmic abstraction of the landscape, almost entirely devoid of signs of human presence. In the smoky chiaroscuro, all outlines of the figure and landscape, as well as all color tones, are softened. In the barely perceptible transitions from light to shadow and the vibration of Leonardo's sfumato, every definiteness of individuality and its psychological state dissolves and is ready to disappear. The Mona Lisa is not just a portrait. It is a visual symbol of the very life of a human and nature, united into a whole and presented abstractly from an individual's specific form. Behind the barely noticeable movement, like a slight ripple running across the still surface of this harmonious world, lies the wealth of possibilities of physical and spiritual existence. Look closely at the horizon line behind Mona Lisa's left and right shoulders. As you've correctly noted, the horizon of the landscape does not align with the figure, creating an illusion of movement. The conflicting horizons were part of Leonardo's intention to create an optical illusion. The horizon is slightly curved, while Mona Lisa's shoulders are depicted straight. Leonardo understood that our brain would be confused, trying to resolve the visual discrepancy. We expect the horizon to align, so we perceive it as straight. This causes us to see the shoulders as slanted, although they are not. When our brain corrects this, an illusion of movement is created, as if the figure is slightly shifting within the frame. Let's analyze another optical trick. Look into Mona Lisa's eyes. Is she smiling? Now look at her lips. It's not quite what you thought, is it? The smile appears and disappears as we scan the face. But when we turn away, the smile remains. When Leonardo was perfecting Lisa's smile, he studied muscle and nerve work by dissecting corpses. We can see these studies in his anatomical drawings. He was fascinated by how a smile works and analyzed every possible movement of each part of the face, studying the origin of every nerve controlling each facial muscle. Amazingly, Leonardo already knew from his optical studies that light rays do not converge at a single point in the eye, but instead hit the entire area of the retina. And this is the key to her mysterious smile. The human eye has two different areas for viewing the world. The central area, called the fovea, is where people see colors, read fine print, and distinguish details. And the peripheral area surrounding the fovea is where people see black and white, movement, and shadows. When we look at a face, We spend most of the time focusing on another person's eyes. Therefore, when a person's central gaze is directed at Mona Lisa's eyes, the less precise peripheral vision is on her mouth. And because peripheral vision is not interested in specific details, it also captures the shadows from Mona Lisa's cheekbones. This is the solution to the great mystery. Leonardo painted the smile of the Mona Lisa using shadows. These shadows are almost invisible to the fovea, but are perfectly distinguishable by the edges of the retina. So when we look at the eyes, nose, eyebrows, we see these shadows, and Mona Lisa smiles. But as soon as we shift our fovea to the corners of her lips, these shadows disappear, and Mona Lisa no longer smiles. It's as if she is playing with us. We can prove this theory quite simply by looking directly into her eyes and thinking about how much she is smiling. Then move your gaze between her eyes and lips and see how her expression changes. It's not your imagination. This is how vision works. By the way, the Italian name for the painting, La Gioconda, means jocund, happy, or jovial. In general, it must be said that Leonardo was not just an artist. We know him mainly as an artist, but he was an artist among other things. We can see many of his intellectual pursuits in his notebook entries, where he sketched and wrote about physics, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, anatomy, and physiology. Leonardo was a universal man who was an accomplished artist, engineer, astronomer, philosopher, anatomist, mathematician, sculptor, architect, civil engineer, diplomat, inventor, composer, physicist, physiologist, botanist, chemist, zoologist, cartoonist, scientist, architectural draftsman, designer, and writer. Nevertheless, Leonardo da Vinci primarily perceived himself as an engineer or scientist. He devoted relatively little time to visual art, working slowly and often being distracted by other tasks, mainly scientific in nature. And in the Mona Lisa, on which he worked for 4 years, he certainly also embodied these scientific tasks. On one hand, there is the naturalism of meticulously drawn details. On the other hand, there is the mystery of the hidden intent. The main idea of his paintings is always encoded, just like the mirrored writing of his works, which can only be read in reflection. Under the power of Mona Lisa's gaze and smile fell not only admiring novices, but also recognized masters, creators of schools, and new movements. The list of names of those who used the Mona Lisa, her image or details of the image, or simply a mention of her, is impressive. Dali, Warhol, Magritte, Malevich, Duchamp, Rauschenberg, Leiger, Botero. But about how other artists quoted the Mona Lisa, why they did it, and how her theft from the Louvre brought her colossal fame, we will talk in another video. We will also look at how the Mona Lisa's smile appears in other of his paintings with seemingly unrelated characters, and find out what meaningful line of the great Leonardo is traceable in all of this. Subscribe to the channel and write your questions and desired topics for new episodes in the comments. See you soon.